Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Skeptic Skeleton Sunday Streams. And yes, I know I'm woefully late for this one, but please forgive me. I had to find a couple of videos on the menu for this week, and I think they'll be good. So starting out, we're going to talk about abortion, everyone's favorite topic. This is great optics, and none of you can convince me otherwise. I mean, all zero of you watching right now can't convince me otherwise. But let's get started.
So for example, like animal rights activists will say it should be a crime to destroy certain eggs of certain creatures. That should be a crime. But those same people will be for the destruction of, say, a human being growing in the fetus.
Before we get to the response to this, do you understand why those animal activists are against the destruction of those eggs? Or did you just find someone who sort of kind of maybe agreed with you and then tried to use them to point out a contradiction in their beliefs? The reason, as far as I understand it, as to why some animal activist groups do not want the destruction of certain eggs is because those species in particular are nearing extinction. And the destruction of those eggs will further push that species to the edge of extinction. This does not apply when it comes to abortion. The human race massively overpopulates the earth more than any other animal that I can tell, or I should say rather large animal, not counting insects and things like that. So I don't think it's the same. I think the destruction of an endangered species eggs is not the same thing as the destruction of an overpopulated species eggs.
Okay, but have you asked people are you assuming that people have certain opinions on animal rights who are in this march?
No. It's obviously it's not monolithic. It's a mixed bag. So that's why the variety of interviews to see the wide spectrum of beliefs.
Yeah. Again, I'm just interested to see how it's framed and if it's presented accurately.
I'll tell you this: we're Christians, and we have an obligation because of.
No, they're Christians. I never would have guessed.
What we believe, to have integrity and to tell the truth. So, say for example,
is that obligation based on your Christianity, or is that obligation based on you? Because you phrased it as if to imply that if you weren't a Christian, you wouldn't have any of those obligations. You wouldn't care about truth. You wouldn't care about doing the right thing. You wouldn't care about telling people the truth. You would just do other things.
Well, if you had atheists in here marching today, they don't have a workable worldview to make sense of integrity. So the person.
How do you know that? Different atheists have different worldviews. So how do you know that none of them, or even most of them, don't have a workable worldview that goes with integrity? And even if they don't, I don't see why that matters. They can have integrity for one reason that has nothing to do with their worldview and still have integrity. I don't see why you need a worldview to encompass integrity before you can act on it or before you can engage in it. I can just do something because I think it's right, not because I checked my worldview first and then my worldview told me to do it.
You should be worried about is the atheist who has a worldview that says that there are no absolutes. From a Christian perspective, there's an absolute standard that I must maintain integrity and always tell.
No, that's not true. Not a Christian framework. It's not that you must, it's that you should. It's that you ought to. If you really must, then you don't have a choice in the matter. You're going to whether you want to or not. But there is no force implied. You have the free will to do otherwise. So as long as you believe that's the case, there is no must. It's just you should. That's what's recommended.
Tell the truth. And to not tell the truth is a sin.
Okay, but so what if it is?
But people can't have their own moral compass without a divine reason?
Well, I would say that you can't have a meaningful justification.
Meaningful justification meaning what? Because a meaningful justification is a subjective evaluation of other justifications. You've decided that they can't have a meaningful justification before engaging with whatever justification that they have, which doesn't you're open to a conversation, it sounds like you've already decided, hey, if you don't have my justification, then you just can't have a meaningful justification because you don't have mine. Or at least that's what it sounds like this guy is saying.
For a moral complaint, if you don't have God,
why would I need a justification for a moral complaint? I don't get that. What makes you think that that's necessary or that anyone cares about that? I mentioned this in a previous stream regarding morality, but when people often make their moral complaints, they are not making their moral complaints from a justified perspective. They don't, quite frankly, most of the time care about their justifications. Regardless of whether it's the person committing the assault or the person being assaulted, neither one of them cares about the justification of the other. And I don't think justification is even relevant. Even if you had your perfect fancy smancy justification for why it's morally correct to stab your neighbor, I still wouldn't do it. And I don't think you would either. So I don't think you actually care about these justifications or ultimate moral justifications or whatever.
That's the absolute standard. So, for example, if you were to take the atheist framework, right, and say the view...
And before you get to that, what exactly is the atheist framework?
As the absolute standard. So, for example, if you were to take the atheist framework, right, and say the view of origins, where...
Is there an atheist framework, or is atheism literally just the meaning, not believing in God?
Well, you could say that the statement, the claim, there is no God, but it's not...
But is it a statement of all people who may consider themselves atheists, or maybe best described as atheists because of their belief or lack thereof? Is there something to say that they all share something?
Sure, a denial of God's existence and the belief that, say, it's not to say that atheism is monolithic. You have atheists who are dualists, atheists who are naturalistic materialists. They believe that all there is matter and motion, that all there is the natural, nothing supernatural, but they have the same fundamental claim about the universe: is there's no God, no governance, no guidance, no personal God. No.
This is not a claim about the universe as much as this is an implication depending on how the position is framed or lack thereof. So if you say, is there a God? And I say, I don't know. And then you go, oh, so what you're saying is there is no God behind the creation of the universe. I did not say that. What I said was, I don't know. And at its core, before you get to the strong ends of the atheist spectrum, at its core, it's just, I'm not a theist. I am not on your side. I do not believe this thing. I do not believe this thing is not the same thing as this thing is false, or I know this thing is false. So again, this very much depends on which atheist he's talking to, but in regards to lack of belief atheists who merely lack a belief in God, they aren't saying anything about the creation of the universe or anything else, because this isn't about that. This is about whether or not you believe a God exists. And if I do not know what a God is supposed to be, and I know he's not addressing this to me specifically, but if I don't know what a God is supposed to be, then I can't believe it exists. And if I can't believe it exists because I don't even understand what it is, then that technically implies that I don't believe that a God was the creator behind the universe, but I don't know what was. I have no information to go off of. I don't know. I don't know if it's that or if it's anything else. I'm just not convinced by anything at the moment. So it's not a matter of you don't know, therefore you're saying God doesn't exist, which is how he's phrasing it. I don't know if that's his intention or not, but that's how it's coming off.
No personal order.
Okay, have you met someone who would
personal order meaning what?
describe themselves as an atheist who just doesn't care what's out there and doesn't deny the existence of God, but just doesn't really care?
That'd be saying agnostic.
Okay, kids, let's have a lesson on atheism versus agnosticism. All right, atheism is about your beliefs. Gnosticism is about what you know. If you are a theist, you believe that God exists. If you're an atheist, you do not believe that a God exists. That does not mean that you believe a God does not exist, because within the subsets of beliefs, you have degrees of knowledge. And there are various degrees I'm not going to go into, but the basics are Gnosticism, which is I know, and agnosticism, which is I don't know. So a Gnostic theist would be someone who knows that God exists, whereas an agnostic atheist would be someone who does not know whether God exists. Therefore, they are not a theist, which would mean they're an atheist. So, to sum up the lesson, it's very simple. Whether you are either a theist or an atheist, but within both theism and atheism, you are either Gnostic or agnostic regarding the subject to varying degrees. So it is not as simple to say, well, you're either an atheist or an agnostic, because agnosticism is a subset both of theism and atheism. The degrees to which you know things is a subset of the things that you believe or don't believe. So the dichotomy he's setting up where an atheist is not an agnostic and an agnostic is not an atheist is not true. Now, that being said, some people do use the term in that way. Some people will describe themselves as agnostic because they don't like the label of atheism, and that's fine. They have their own reasons. I'm not one of those people. So that's not something that I particularly care about. I just wanted to be clear for my audience that an atheist can be agnostic, meaning that they don't know, regarding the subject of God, in the same way that a theist can be Gnostic, that they do know that God exists. And whether you're a Gnostic or agnostic has nothing to do with whether or not you're a theist or an atheist, because one is how much you know and the other is what you believe, which are two separate things.
Why?
Well, an agnostic would say, you can't know.
An agnostic would not say, you can't know. An agnostic would say, I don't know. Individuals that say you cannot know, either they know that or they don't. If they don't know that, then they're agnostic with regards to their own claims, which is fine, I guess. But if they do know, then they're not agnostic, they're Gnostic, because that's what it means to know, is to be Gnostic. So that is not something individuals who identify as agnostics typically say. They typically do not go that far to say that there is no way to know, or we can't know, things of that nature. And that's not to say that there aren't agnostic people who say that. There are, but that's not necessarily the agnostic position, because some agnostic people say that.
I don't really care.
Atheist just means like not religious. No,
the classical. I mean, a is a negation of theist. So
a is not necessarily a negation in the same way that not is not necessarily a negation. So, for example, not a TV is not necessarily a negation of a TV. It just encompasses everything that does not fit under the category of a TV. So a lamp is not a TV, but a lamp is not negating a TV. And the same thing applies with belief. To just not be a theist does not mean that you are negating theism. You're just not a part of it. You are just outside of it. You are separate from it. That's all it means. I think he's conflating separation with negation, and I don't know why.
Theism, agnostic means without knowledge, without God. So their classic definition of an atheist is there is no God.
Again, when it comes to definitions, you can have the classical definitions, but whether or not an individual accepts that definition is up to them. So you have to work with the definitions of the individuals you are speaking with. You cannot tell someone the definition of a word if they are using it differently, because then you're still not addressing the thing they're talking about. You're addressing something else. If I'm referring to can, as in the metal cylindrical thing that holds food sometimes, and that's what I mean by a can, and you're like, why are we discussing the ability to do something? You and I are discussing two different things. And you, as much as you might want to say the classical definition of can refers to ability, that's not what I'm talking about. So you can go on and on about ability, but that's not the subject that I'm talking about. That's not the definition that I'm using. So bringing up classical definitions will get you no good with someone who isn't using classical definitions. And they're not going to change their definitions just because you brought up other definitions they don't agree with. If I mean something when I say a particular word, you cannot tell me that I mean something else. You can tell me you have different understandings of that, but you can't tell me that I am saying what I think wrongly, because that's essentially what it is to use words or to use the definition of words. To understand the definition of words is to understand what someone means when they say something. And if you want to tell me my definition is wrong, you essentially are telling me that what I mean when I say something is wrong. And I'm not convinced that that's something that I can be wrong about.
That's what the word means. And so with
that's what some people mean when they use the word, or that's what classical definitions mean, but that might not be the way that I'm using it, which it should be the point of this conversation. Do you want to argue with me and my definitions, or do you want to argue with definitions that I am not using?
That's what it's become.
Well, that's the classic definition.
People who choose to ascribe to, well, there may be people who choose to use that word who are very adamant that they're, in the same way that there are some people who would deem themselves religious, especially in a place like Ireland. There would be people that I know who may say, well, maybe I'll get married in a church just for shits and giggles kind of thing. But actually, if you sat down with them, they probably don't believe
it would just be cultural.
Anything.
Right.
It's cultural, yeah, exactly. And I think but then you have people who feel very strongly about their beliefs, and I think there would be people who feel very strongly about their lack of belief. But I suppose a belief that there is no God is a belief.
Yes, but that is often not the belief that is being ascribed. It's also worth noting that basically she's explaining in simpler terms how one person can be religious and that means different things to different people depending on who you talk to. The same thing applies with atheism. That means different things to different people depending on who you talk to.
Sure it is. And at the same time,
then I think there are people who just don't give a shit.
Well, sure, yeah. There's more indifferent atheists, and then there are militant atheists, right? The spectrum gets pretty broad.
Yes, but then you cannot categorize them under the same classical definition. If militant atheists and not caring atheists all fall under the same term, then what's the distinction between the two? How can they operate on the exact same definition, yet be militant or liberal or whatever?
But what I would say, there's a shared belief among atheists in terms of origins.
Okay, but what if you have an atheist who believes in a religion that ascribes something similar to a god, but they don't call it a god? I don't think it would be fair to say that their beliefs of there is no God would be the same as mine. If you have someone who legitimately, unironically believes that the flying spaghetti monster created the universe, but they don't think the flying spaghetti monster is a god, I don't think it's fair to classify both of us under the same definition and say we have the same belief regarding creation. Why don't you just ask people individually what their understanding is, rather than assuming you already know before you engage with the person, which is, as far as I can tell, what you've done with this person.
So atheism is a denial of God's existence, but atheism has a particular metaphysic, a particular ethic, a view of how they know things. Now, it may not be...
No, it doesn't. It's a single answer to a single question on a single issue. I don't know how you got anything else out of it. Do you believe a God exists? No. And then you get all these other things from just a simple no, or I don't know.
The same across the board. But say, for example, if I walked up to the typical kind of secular educated person today who denies God's existence, and I'd say, how did we get here?
I also want to point out that you're kind of using denies God existence flippantly, because you're not specifying if you're talking about someone who actively denies God's existence or passively does not believe, which would be a denial, I guess. To not know something, I don't necessarily think is to deny it. It's just to admit that you don't know.
There'd be a consistent story. Oh, we got here through random mutation.
That's assuming that they believe that, which they might not. They might believe something else entirely and can also still be atheist as long as whatever other thing they believe is not a god.
Maybe
over evolutionary time.
Maybe in the States, but I don't think in Ireland anyway. We're in Ireland at the moment. I would disagree with that. That doesn't mean that I'm right.
So you wouldn't say that atheists believe in evolution?
There are some atheists that do, but it is not fair to say that all of them believe in that. There are Christians that believe in atheism, but that has nothing to do with Christianity. So why would atheists believing in evolution mean that atheists have to believe in evolution?
That's not what I said.
So do you agree then they would?
But, well, I can't speak on behalf of someone else.
You can't.
You'd have to ask every single atheist in the world.
Sure, no, and
I wouldn't go as far as to say you'd have to ask every single atheist in the world, but you would have to talk to them on somewhat of an individual basis and refer to different variations rather than the broad spectrum. So if I address a tendency that I see among some Christians, I specify that it is among some Christians, and I am addressing those Christians to whom the thing I'm talking about applies, not Christians in general, not a specific sect of Christianity, not a specific subset or denomination. I'm talking about to whom it applies. And I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he genuinely thinks they're all the same, and they basically all believe in evolution. But I don't think he has any good reason to think that other than he's seen the most popular ones say that.
And you heard me say before that atheism isn't monolithic.
Yeah, exactly.
But they share particular beliefs about, because you can't just say there is no God and then nothing happens.
You can say, I don't know, and then I don't know, which is still not the same thing as what you said they said. Again, to say I don't know does not mean there is no God behind creation. There's to say I simply have no information. I have no opinion on the subject. I don't have knowledge, and I can't understand what that would even mean. And if you can't understand what something means, then you also can't truly understand what it would mean to negate it, or to say that it's wrong, or to say that it doesn't exist. Someone who says that they lack a belief in God because they just don't have enough evidence is not saying that this thing is wrong, because they don't have enough evidence. If they had enough evidence to definitively say it was wrong, they wouldn't appeal to a lack of evidence. They would appeal to the evidence of the contrary.
There's no neutrality. Everybody has a particular view of, say...
You can say there's no neutrality, but that doesn't mean that there is in fact no neutrality. An atheist might be neutral on the issue. Someone who's not heard of the subject might not have an opinion on the subject. I see no reason why there can't be neutrality, and why someone can't be neutral to a subject that they just don't feel they have enough information to know anything about.
Okay, use me as an example of neutrality. Mm-hmm. I just don't think it's relevant. I'm here now. I don't see what is relevant as to what might happen.
Well, I'll show you how it is relevant. Let's take two frameworks.
What he did just now, you might not have noticed, is that he shifted the goalpost and he changed the subject. She was trying to demonstrate that there are atheists who simply have a neutral position regarding the issue of creation. They simply don't know anything about origins, and they really don't care. They have no opinion on the subject, and thus are distinct from individuals who believe in evolution and abiogenesis and all of that stuff that would be life out of nowhere, life's evolution, the origins of the universe, all of that. She just tried to distinguish and separate herself from other atheists, to which he said all have this shared belief about origin. And instead of addressing that, he goes, okay, well, let me try to convince you that it's relevant. Let me try to get you out of that neutral position, without actually admitting that she is in that neutral position, and there are atheists that simply do not care or do not have a position on the origin thing. Basically, she tried to get away from him trying to lump everyone together, and she did that. So now he's like, let me show you why you're just like everybody else. Instead of acknowledging what she actually said, he just went on to a different subject.
say the Christian worldview and the atheistic perspectives. Okay, so say multiple.
I'm not going to identify with either of those.
That's fine. No, you don't have to. Just take it as an experiment, a thought experiment. Okay. So let's say someone says, "Well, I don't think it really matters. The question of God doesn't matter." Okay. A person who kidnaps and rapes and mutilates a child, is that wrong?
To me, it is, because my definition of wrong is things that go against my values. Human life, prosperity, and happiness are things that I value. The situation you just described very much goes against my values, so it is very much wrong, dare I say, evil, according to my definition of right and wrong. So the answer you get out of this question is going to depend on the definitions that you receive, which, if you could take it as a theme of this video so far, even though we're supposed to be talking about abortion, definitions would be the theme of this week's stream. Because at the end of the day, it depends on who you talk to. The answer you get is going to vary based on who you talk to, because there are individuals who do exactly what you described, and they would not give the same answer that I would.
Yes. On what basis?
On the basis of my definition of right and wrong. When I refer to something being wrong, I am referring to it going against or minimizing my values. The situation you described very much is minimizing my values being actualized in the world, so it is very wrong according to my definition.
What's that? Your gut? The person who rapes the child, his pleasure was that he thought it was a good, moral, happy thing to do to the child.
And I don't care. I don't care what his gut told him to do, and he doesn't care what my definitions are. So the subject really doesn't matter, because he's going to do whatever he wants regardless of what definitions I present him, and I am going to stop him regardless of what gut feeling he presents me with. So the subject really doesn't matter. So you just brought up a pointless thought experiment that has no practical utility in the world. It doesn't really change anything.
And your gut has no authority over him.
And his gut has no authority over me stopping him. Why do I need or want any authority? Why does authority matter in this subject? Are you really going to wait until you have proper authority to stop someone from harming a child? Or are you just going to, stop them from harming the child?
This is the random universe where there is no God, no justice.
Yeah, but if
the justice is whatever we decide it is. Justice is a word like any word, and like any word, we decide what it means. So we come up with the word, we decide its definition, and then we try to apply it. I don't see what God has to do with any of that.
Okay, so what's your point in that?
My point was, you said that you don't think it matters.
Yeah.
And I'm demonstrating to you that it does matter, because
it matters to you, but it still doesn't matter to me. I don't care if I don't have the right authority. I don't care if I don't have what you or anyone else thinks is the proper justification. I am going to stop someone from harming a child, and it is just that simple.
Because if we take the atheistic framework, it matters because atheisms would ultimately say that we all came from highly evolved societies of bacteria.
Societies of bacteria. This guy actually just said societies of bacteria. I'm going to check this. I'm going to check the chat in a minute, but if anyone is actually there, just put in societies of bacteria, please.
We're in a universe that doesn't care about us. There is God above us, only sky above us. There's no meaning.
I mean, technically there's space above that sky and other things, but I know what you're getting at.
No value, no purpose.
What about the meaning and value and purpose that we give to things? You're saying there's no objective meaning, no objective value, or no objective purpose. But why do you care about whether or not there is objective meaning, value, or purpose? If those objective values or objective meanings contradicted the values that you hold, would you still just go with them because they're there? Assuming I understood what the hell it even meant to say objective morality is real and you have an objective moral duty, and it is a fact of the universe, immutable, unchangeable, that's just is the way it is, and that goes against your basic values and encourages you to stab your neighbor every Sunday, would you do it? Would you do it purely because objective morality? Would you do it because, well, it's the objectively moral thing to do? Why do you care what the objectively moral thing to do is if it mitigates your values? If it enhances your values, then that makes sense. I mean, it's still not relevant because you're still going based on your values, but if it mitigates your values, what good reason would you have to do something that mitigates your values, that goes against your values?
I'll give you Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, famous atheist. He says there is no good, no evil. There's only blind and pitiless indifference.
As far as the universe is concerned, that seems to be the case, but what would it mean for there to be good or be evil? I'm not convinced that those terms have any meaning beyond the meaning that we ascribe to them, in the same way that better doesn't mean anything unless we give it a proper context. If I say someone is better than someone else, what am I talking about? You don't know, do you? You need more context. You need more information. You would need to know what I mean by better before you could agree with me or disagree with me or see if I'm right or wrong. But if I just told you that Timmy is better than Johnny and you have no other information to go off of, you can't decide if I'm right or wrong. And the same applies with morality or the word right or the word wrong. Unless you give a proper definition for these things, they effectively don't have any meaning. They don't mean anything. They don't convey any ideas to anybody. So I don't see how they're relevant to human behavior, especially when humans seem to act regardless of those things. Unless you think that, you know, a rapist has a philosophical discussion with the person he's raping beforehand and tries to demonstrate his case.
Which means that the raped, mutilated child, what happened might have been painful, but it wasn't wrong.
Objectively speaking, no, but I don't care whether it's objectively wrong. I care whether I think it's wrong. And that's really the only thing that matters to me.
From an atheistic framework.
Okay, but I don't see what the difference would be just because, let's say, God existed and the same thing happened to that child.
Right. I have a meaningful...
Well, how has that changed the actual situation? It hasn't.
In case people are confused, she's basically saying, what's the difference? Even if a God exists, that thing still happened, and it still doesn't seem to be objectively wrong, even if a God exists and then said it was objectively wrong. He just said it's objectively wrong in his opinion.
Oh, right.
If we need to have a justifiable basis, then so does God. And if you say God is the justifiable basis, then I am my own justifiable basis.
No, we're in a fallen world and evil things happen in a fallen, sinful world, but we're talking about the moral...
Fallen world meaning what? I can only assume by that you mean imperfect, but then that depends on some idea of perfect that you've agreed upon that you have not shared with the rest of the class. So I'm not willing to grant that that's an imperfect world, not even in a Christian framework, because I don't know what a perfect world would even be under a Christian framework, because again, you haven't shared with the rest of the class.
Foundations of being able to complain about a child being raped.
Why do I need a moral foundation to be able to complain about anything? Why would I care about that? If I'm complaining, I'm not complaining because I think I have an objective moral grounds. I'm complaining because I think I'm right. And that's all that's necessary to complain. We haven't addressed the issue of actually doing something, preventing it, stopping it, or seeking justice after the fact. We're just at the point of complaints. And I don't see why complaints require justifications.
The atheist has no ultimate meaningful...
That's her opinion.
You can call it ultimate, and you can, when it comes to God, you can call God's opinion ultimate, meaningful, whatever, but that is to you. That is an understanding that you have accepted and agreed upon. That is not something you have demonstrated to be a fact of reality. That's something that you say, and then people agree or disagree, and we have a conversation about it. But it's not an objective existence in the same way that pretty much anything else is an objective existence. At least not as far as I can tell, unless you can go find me the right and the wrong in the universe, and we can put it in a bottle and test it and measure the levels of rightness or wrongness.
Well, no, it's a philosophical refutation of atheism.
No, it's not. It's your opinion. Oh, I just noticed deconverted man in the chat because I actually clicked over. Hi, how are you doing? I hope you are well, and I hope you are good. Just all one of you don't spam the chat all at the same time, please. Okay, back to the video. Oh yes, now I remember what I was going to say in regards to the whole it's a philosophical refutation, yada yada. So here's the thing: it's either a refutation successfully or it isn't. You can say it's a philosophical refutation, but at the end of the day, that is good enough for you. That is good enough to convince you. That does not mean that it is a successful refutation. Just because you're convinced by something does not mean that it's a refutation, does not mean that it's a proof, does not mean that it's good evidence. You actually need a solid basis to say it's a refutation beyond, well, I like it. It convinced me. It's good enough for me.
It's not merely an opinion. Okay.
You can say it's not merely an opinion, but saying it's not merely an opinion does not make it not merely an opinion.
It's still an opinion. It may not be merely an opinion to you, but it still is an opinion.
Well, it's about what provides meaningful preconditions for moral indignation over atrocities like that.
Why do I need that? Or why would I even want that? That sounds useless. It sounds like it doesn't change anything about the circumstance. It doesn't prevent the thing from happening. It doesn't give me more strength to prevent the thing from happening or to punish those who commit the thing. So I don't see why that's relevant.
Now, atheism says all that was a bag of biological stuff that ultimately it's protoplasm in a universe that doesn't care. That's the atheistic perspective. Now,
I'm going to operate under that assumption as I have been, even though that's not what I think. But let's say that's the case. Again, so what? I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that it violated my values, so I'm going to stop it. Or it went against my values, so I'm going to stop it. The person, the act, the behavior, whatever. I'm going to mitigate it to the greatest degree that I possibly can because it goes against my values, and that is what I mean when I say something is wrong. You still haven't described what you mean when you say something is wrong. You're just saying it's wrong, whatever that means. What is wrong about the situation that you described? Where is the wrongness, and how do you define it?
From my perspective as a Christian, that was the image of God.
I don't care whether or not it was the image of God, and I don't think that you do either, because if it wasn't the image of God, would you really allow it to happen? If you didn't believe that a child was made in the image of God, would you just allow harm to come to them? Or do you not care whether or not they're made in the image of God? You're not going to allow harm to come to a child.
There are absolute standards of good.
If there weren't, would your opinions change and would your behavior change? If there were not absolute standards of good, would you allow harm to come to a child? The answer is either yes, in which case your beliefs aren't based on any sort of values. They're just based on this thing being objectively true. Not that it has any practical utility, not that it maximizes any values, but it just is true, so I'm going to do it. I don't care if it goes against my values. I'm just going to stab my neighbor every Sunday because that's what I do.
God is a holy God.
God is a holy God because he says he's a holy God. I don't think anyone's ever actually fact checked that. He just sort of said he's a holy God and everyone went, okay, I believe you.
Still mutilated.
Sure.
We don't see what the difference
and the atheist.
And what she's describing is that it doesn't change anything because he's like, oh, but now God exists. So we have an ultimate standard. We have an ultimate being. We have an ultimate law. And she's like, yeah, but the baby's still dead, though. At the end of the day, whether God is there or not, the baby's still dead. Whether or not God was there or whether or not you have ultimate grounds or justifications to complain, that doesn't change the fact that it happened. So what difference does it make? And he's still not describing anything that's meaningful to me. It's just, well, now when I complain about it, I feel better about myself because I have an objective standard and an objective ultimate reason to complain, whereas you don't have an ultimate objective reason to complain. Therefore, I don't know.
Atheist doesn't get to complain about it in a meaningful way because that's a bag of biological.
the atheist doesn't get to complain about it. The atheist can complain about it. You might not agree with their justifications, but they can very much complain about it. There is nothing that is preventing them from complaining about it, especially if they just subscribe to a different religion that has objective morality but doesn't have a God. That still solves this problem that you say exists.
Maybe an atheist wouldn't complain.
Okay, but as far as the biological stuff goes, okay, but, and hear me out on this one, I don't care if it's biological stuff or not. It's still, the harming of that biological stuff still goes against my values. So I'm gonna stop it.
To you because you wouldn't listen to it. But
I'd listen to them, and here's why I think they would complain.
When you want to be naughty.
I hate advertisements.
You look nice. At manscaped.com, get 20%.
I don't care. Go away.
The atheist would complain because he's in the image of God.
What about not being in the image of God prevents you from complaining? You seem to have some sort of presuppositionalist view of things that the only way you can complain about moral atrocities is if you're made in the image of God. And if you're not, you just can't, which is not only something you just can't test because you think every human is made in the image of God, so it's impossible to find a human that isn't, but I see no valid reason why that is the case. If we wanted to work under a Christian framework, we could say that angels or devils or demons or whatever are also complain about what they perceive to be moral atrocities. Satan's complained about what he thought was a moral atrocity was what got him kicked out of heaven. Or would you just say Satan's also made in the image of God? Because that's just what everything is. Yeah, it sounds like such a universal cop-out to me that it does not help anyone achieve any greater understanding. It's just, because you're made in the image of God. And we can't prove that or falsify that, but I'm going to just say that, and you're just going to believe me, and we're just going to go with that.
And it's inescapable living in God's world. He knows the truth.
What?
But he denies it with his profession of atheism.
Okay.
So what you're telling me is there is no such thing as an atheist. Atheists don't actually exist. Atheists are just theists who say there's no God and pretend that there's no God, but they all actually know that there is a God. Because you didn't even just say believe, you said no. They know, they just deny it with their mouths, which intellectually doesn't even make sense. You cannot deny something. You can say the words, but you cannot actually engage in the act of denying the truth of something you know to be true. Because to know it to be true is to just, it is to know it to be true. It is to have that understanding. And you cannot deny the understanding that you have because you have the understanding. You would need a different understanding to deny it. You would need something else to change your mind. You can't just change your mind on your own. That's just not how humans work and make decisions. So I don't even know what to say at this point.
But it's a reputation.
No, you keep saying it, and then she points out that that is not something you have objectively demonstrated. That's just a thing you said. So she is correct. You are saying opinions, and then she's like, okay, but you haven't substantiated that or proven that or demonstrated that. You just said that, and you're like, but it's a philosophical refutation. That is an attempt at a philosophical refutation, but a philosophical refutation, just like any refutation, requires a demonstration. You can't just say things and then say it's a philosophical demonstration, and we're just going to carry on from there.
Yeah. But it still doesn't change the practicalities of what has happened.
Well, we weren't talking about the consequences. We're talking about the foundation.
No, she was talking about the effect that it has on reality. What does it actually do? Does it actually mean anything? Or is it just not relevant to the case? When you have one human harming another human, how does the existence of God impact that in a practical sense? And you seem to be going on about some sort of foundation that doesn't actually change anything about the behavior itself. It just sort of kind of gives you a suggestion of how it should be perceived. Kinda. But it doesn't actually do anything. The person's still harmed. The baby's still dead. But you think that that's relevant because now at least I have a foundation. Why do I care about a foundation? Why is a foundation a good thing to have? Why is it something that you would want when it comes to moral claims?
No, but it doesn't change the practicalities of a situation. So that's why I'm saying I don't think that it matters what happens next.
Sure.
Yes.
Because that doesn't change what is happening now.
Oh,
exactly.
Sure does, because watch. In a Christian...
That's your belief. So I can't, I'm not trying to convince you otherwise, but I also can't convince you otherwise because that's what you believe.
Well, no.
She's trying to tell you that even though you're telling her these things, these are all nice and good, but without some sort of objective demonstration, you're just going, look at me, look at how right I am, let me just say things and you believe me, and we move on from there. You're not demonstrating your points, you're just saying your points and then carrying on as if we're supposed to just run along with that.
Well, here's the thing. I think that if we love truth, we should change our opinions.
Love truth? What are you on about? How do you love truth? What does that even mean to love truth? These are the kinds of things that you have to define before you get into a conversation, because otherwise you just talk over people's heads and it sounds indistinct from absolute nonsense.
If we love the truth, we should always want to believe the truth.
I don't think it has anything to do with loving the truth. I think it has something to do with being able to maximize your values and achieve the world you want. If you want to see your values truly maximized, it is best to know the truth regarding any particular situation, because that gives you the best information to go off of. If you know the truth that you are broke, now that information can then be the basis for you getting a job and getting money and then buying the things you want, supporting the causes you want, yada, yada. But if you are under the falsehood that you have money that you do not have, that is to your detriment, and that will prevent you from maximizing your values because you will be operating under a false assumption. So I think there is a practical utility to knowing the truth that has nothing to do with loving it or not loving it, because I do not love the truth that people get hurt. Do you?
I believe that because I'm a Christian. Jesus.
Oh, I see. You don't believe it because it's the truth. You believe it because you're a Christian. And if you weren't a Christian, you wouldn't believe it regardless of whether or not it was true. Got you.
Said he's the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by him.
I don't care about the Father. I don't care about him. And he can say he's the truth all he wants, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Saying you are the truth does not in fact mean that you are the truth. And I don't care about the way or the Father or any of that other stuff.
We follow the one who's the very embodiment of truth. We ought to care.
You follow the one who said he's the very embodiment of truth, but him being the embodiment of truth is something you have to demonstrate. What does it even mean for something to embody truth? Because truth is a word and a concept that refers to the accurate reflection of reality. How is Jesus that any more than I am that?
Truth as Christians. That's a Christian perspective, and it matters because...
Yes, but that's a poorly defined Christian perspective. That's a Christian perspective that doesn't make sense. You can say that's a Christian perspective, but when you say it's a Christian perspective, what you mean to say is it's an opinion.
Because let's say you had two governments, one government that actually believes atheism and runs with it, and one that's Christian.
How can a government be atheist or be Christian? I can actually understand how a government can be Christian in that it would modern its laws after Christian theology, but not only would that in and of itself have a vast degree of variety depending on which denomination was in power, the same could be said of atheism. There are so many other things that fall under the umbrella of atheism that it's not fair to say that it would just be one government. It could be a wide variety of governments that have nothing to do with a God. But I digress.
The atheistic government, if they lived on its principles, would say there are no moral absolutes, there's no punishment, no justice.
No, that has nothing to do with anything. The government enforcing punishments and the government acknowledging the existence of punishments are two different things. Yes, the government would say the universe isn't going to punish itself, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't punish anybody, and that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have laws. They might concede that there's no moral laws, but they also wouldn't care if there were moral laws.
Yeah,
There's no ultimate meaning.
But then,
So what if there's no ultimate meaning? Why do I care about whether or not there's an ultimate meaning if it doesn't change the facts of the situation we're in now?
then you would be using atheism like a belief system.
Sure, because it is.
It's not a belief system in and of itself. It can sprout forth different beliefs, but not being a theist is not a belief system. It is merely not being a part of a belief system.
Any belief system, any absolute belief system is something personally that I cannot ascribe to because I don't.
Do you believe that? What you just said, do you believe it?
Oh, if you believe one sentence, then you have an entire belief system. And she quite clearly expressed what she meant. She does not believe in an absolute belief system. And you're going to try to trap her by saying, well, you believe that sentence, so you believe that sentence is absolutely true. So you believe in an absolute truth system.
Well, now you've asked me that, which makes me feel like I haven't articulated myself accurately.
It means it's a self-refutation.
No, it's not a self-refutation. If you listen and you pay attention to when she says things, you would notice that. And this is something that tends to happen to people, including myself, when you get caught up in the moment and people ask questions that don't necessarily seem relevant to the subject. It's like a deer in the headlights effect. But as I said, whether she can articulate it or not does not mean that she's wrong. Your inability to articulate a point has nothing to do with whether or not the point itself is correct or not correct. If she does not believe in an absolute belief system, that does not mean that she doesn't believe in any belief system. And she can have a belief system that affirms the things that she says, just not to an absolute degree, because she doesn't believe she has absolute knowledge of everything.
Okay, tell me what I've.
You made a claim, and you talked about a belief system, and you talked about not wanting to have an ultimate belief system.
Not that she doesn't want to, but that she does not have one. And I don't see how she could be wrong about that. You either think she's lying or you think she's wrong. If she's lying, then you have to demonstrate that. You have to demonstrate some sort of intentional misinformation being spread. But if you just think she's wrong, then you have to demonstrate that she has a worldview that she is unaware of, or that she has an absolute worldview she is unaware of.
But I asked you if you believe that.
Yeah.
And you ultimately would say yes, which means that the two statements, they wipe each other out.
How do they wipe each other out? If you believe one thing, that means you have an entire belief system. How are those even remotely connected? How do you function?
Tell me that again.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just her reaction was priceless, because she was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Rephrase that in some kind of coherent manner.
You were making a statement about belief systems, like condemning the idea that someone has an actual belief system and holds to it.
Condemning the idea that someone has a belief system and saying that's not my personal choice or my personal way.
I guess I'm not following you.
I'm just not.
She gave you her opinion on belief systems. And her opinion is that it's not for her. What's so hard not to follow? Where did you get lost?
I think that in general it is, personally speaking, I don't think that much good can come from everyone following one thing.
How about this?
But that's people with their own individual beliefs.
So it's.
I don't know what he pointed to, but even then, I don't think you understand what she means by everyone following one thing. What she means by everyone following one thing is the belief system, not a law or a mandate or something like that.
No good can come from following this one thing.
There are going to be so many people who are in that march that there are other things that I disagree with.
No, I know, but you said that there's no good from following any one thing.
Yes, but thing is not being clearly defined here. So you're talking about the ability to do something, and she's talking about a metal cylindrical thing that holds food. That you both think you're describing the word can. This is why it's important to clarify your terms before a discussion begins so you don't end up speaking past each other like you're doing right now.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't articulate myself properly then. One belief system, and using that belief system to all the other choices and beliefs that you have.
But you realized, and I mean this with a lot of respect to you, you realized that you articulated a belief system just now.
No, she articulated what you think is a belief system, but she did not articulate what she thinks is a belief system. So until you both have a decent understanding of what a belief system is, you're going to keep talking past each other. And I'm not going to keep repeating this.
And you said that this should be the one we follow.
No, that's not what she said. She was referring to herself and the one that she follows or does not follow. She is not making claims about other people. I don't know how you keep mixing this up. Every time she says, this is my opinion on why I like chocolate, you're like, oh, so you're saying everybody should like chocolate. What? No, I didn't say that.
That we don't follow any one belief system, but you just gave me one.
No, she didn't. What belief system did she give you? Tell me. I genuinely want to know. What belief system did she just give you?
I didn't say that because I would never wish to say to anyone else how they should live their lives, because I don't know how they should live their lives. So would you tell rapists that he should stop?
Telling the rapist that he should stop raping is not telling him how to live his life. It is telling him to abstain from one activity. Telling someone to abstain from one activity is not the same thing as telling someone how to live their life. If you've had an overbearing parent, they will tell you how to live your life and tell you what decisions to make. Telling someone what decisions they shouldn't make, again, is not the same thing. But no, I would not say that to the rapist. I would stop them from raping and I would have them incarcerated and separated from society for as long as humanly possible. I would not have any words for the rapist. I would have actions for the rapist because that is what matters. The rapist doesn't care what I have to say because they're a rapist. And I don't care what they have to say because they're a rapist. I'm just going to get them as far away from other people as humanly possible for as long as possible to prevent them from raping people any more than I can. Other people are more than free to try to talk to the rapist and reform them. That is not my goal. My goal is to make everyone as safe as possible, and having a conversation with the rapist instead of separating them from the rest of society is not an effective means of achieving that goal.
That's a good point. That is a contradiction. Yes, I would.
No, it's not a contradiction. Even if you would tell him that, that doesn't mean that you're forcing that on him. You're just telling him your views. Also, telling the rapist to stop raping is not giving him a belief system, which is what this conversation was about.
But I suppose that's because...
Can I just say this with respect to you?
Yeah.
The only way you can get to that kind of fallacious, and I don't mean that offensively, I promise I don't, but it is fallacious. What you just did demonstrated the collapse of an unbelieving worldview. Christians can't live with that kind of tension.
Person who doesn't articulate this.
No, I don't mean it. No, listen, I mean...
They kind of talked over each other, so I didn't hear exactly what she said, but as far as I got, she was basically saying that it's not fair to take her inability to articulate her words as the condemnation of an entire atheistic belief system. He's taking her as like an example of atheists and saying, look, this is what you are. She made a contradiction, so you all make contradictions.
This with absolute humility too.
I mean that, like, with all the things as well. Like, I cannot be held up as a representative of something that I'm not.
Oh, no.
There you go.
I'm talking about that.
I'm only one individual. Whereas
sure.
You are, I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are happy to represent Christians.
Sure, I'm a Christian.
Yeah, well, you're happy to represent them, whereas I don't wish to represent anything because I can't say that I speak on behalf of anyone else. And even with the people who, yes, we all agree on one thing there, but they're...
No, we don't. We don't all agree on one thing, especially the people who violate that thing most of the time. And the thing, which again hasn't been properly spoken about, I can only assume is the rape thing he was talking about before, and not all of us agree on that. That's why different countries have different rape laws.
could be in all the thousands of people in that march, there could be very few people that I actually have a second opinion by. Like, just to be really, to exaggerate, that's not quite the word that I mean, just to make a very big statement, there may not be another second thing that I agree anywhere with.
Yeah,
like, yeah.
I think we're getting a little far field of the original thing, but we're
I agree, but not for the same reasons that you do.
talking about a meaningful foundation for moral complaints.
Why do we need, or why should we want, a meaningful foundation for moral complaints? Because I am far more concerned with what people do than whether or not they have foundations to do them, or objective foundations. I don't care why you stabbed my sister in the throat. I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to separate you from the rest of society as much as possible to prevent you stabbing other people in general. I'm not going to sit there and say, well, let me see, did they have objective moral grounds to do so? And that's not to say that there's no nuance involved in cases. There are. But I'm saying, from my perspective, that my initial, or my most, or my I don't want to say best, because that's also poorly defined. What I think would be most effective in maximizing my values is to remove you from society and remove you from other people as long as possible to prevent the possibility of you stabbing other people. That's what my reaction is going to be, because I think that maximizes my values the most. I don't care about whether or not I have ultimate moral justification or whatever.
Moral indignation.
Yeah, but I just disagree with you.
I think that and I mean this with absolute respect to you, I think saying I just disagree with you isn't quite an answer to the challenge I presented to you.
Yes, but if the challenge you presented to me is which is better, vanilla or chocolate, there is not going to be an objective answer to that. You are presenting a challenge that I don't believe has an answer. I'm not even convinced you're presenting a challenge, because you're like, why don't you have moral objective? Like, why don't you have objective morals? And I'm like, I don't care about objective morals. And you're like, well, that doesn't really answer my question. And it's like, but the question is functionally flawed. This is one of those, do they know that you beat your wife kind of things, where it's like, but I don't. And you're like, but that didn't answer my question. Do they or do they not know? And it's like, but I don't. So at the end of the day, I think you're asking a question and you're wanting an answer that simply does not exist. You want me to give an objective answer to why this is my favorite color.
In terms of what provides a meaningful foundation for ethics.
I don't care about what provides a meaningful foundation for ethics to you. I only care what provides a meaningful foundation of ethics to me. I don't care about anything regarding some sort of ultimate standard or anything of that nature. And yeah, you can say that's not an answer to your challenge, but I think your challenge is stupid.
Now, this is an ethical question here. This is all about ethics.
Not necessarily. When we regard things like abortion, we're regarding the legal practicality, not just the ethics of it, because there are ethical reasons why alcohol or cigarettes or things like that should be illegal, but they're not. And there are practical reasons, primarily being that if we just straight up tried to ban alcohol, people would still sell it and still find a way to get around that. It would just make the situation worse, because now it can't be regulated because it's illegal. So everything's happening under the table and under the radar. But I say that to say that law does not primarily function on ethics. And when we regard topics like abortion, that's not strictly an ethical issue, because there are individuals that say, I don't like the ethics of it, but I understand that if we ban abortion everywhere, people are still going to engage in it. And now they're going to engage in it in a much more harmful way, which is not actually reducing the number of abortions. It just is reducing the number of safe abortions. And I'm not saying that's the position I personally have on the subject. I'm saying that's a position that one person could have that has nothing to do with the ethics of it, but the practicality of it, the pragmatic usefulness of it. They still don't like abortion, but they still understand that it's going to happen. And if it is going to happen, then we ought to have a safe way for it to happen.
On one side, we say that you ought not be able to kill a human being in the womb.
You call it a human being in the womb, but I don't see it as such. And even if I did, I don't care. At the end of the day, this human being in the room has no right to my body, even at the expense of its own life. So, as far as the abortion thing goes, now that we're, 13 minutes in and we're finally addressing the subject, with regards to abortion, no one has a right to your body without your consent and against your will. So, if I don't want this baby inside me, why should I have to have it? Why does it have a right to my body against my will and without my consent? And you say, well, because its life depends on it. And I don't think that that matters. There are a lot of homeless people. And let's say a homeless person breaks into your house. They are on your property. If you kick them out, let's say a homeless person broke into your house because they were starving, and this has been the 7th day they've starved in a row, and they're going to die if they don't get something to eat right now. And you don't want them in your house. They are in your house against your will and without your consent. Are you no longer allowed to kick them out? Because if you kick them out, they're going to die, which is functionally the same thing that happens with abortion. If you kick the baby out, it's going to die. Does that mean homeless people have a right to whomever's house they want as long as their life is on the line? Does my life being on the line give me a right to you and your body? Because I don't think it does, nor do I think it should.
And the other side says it's an injustice to not let us do it.
The other side does not say it is an injustice to not let us do it. The other side says it is an injustice to force me to give birth to something or someone, rather, that I don't want, regardless of, or not don't want, but does not have a right to my body. So regardless of personhood or lifehood, assuming I granted all of those things, which I don't, but let's assume that I did, none of that is relevant here. It is an injustice that I have to let these homeless people just break into my house and live here. Because if I kick them out, they're going to die. And I can't kill someone now, can I? Even though kicking someone out is not the same thing as killing them. Even if the baby would die without the mother's womb, that does not mean that you are in fact killing the baby. But that's how you view it. And that's your perspective. But that's not my perspective. And even if it was, I would rather them not have, I would rather not set the standard that as long as someone's life is on the line, they have a right to you, your body, your autonomy, and you don't. You just have to sit there and grit it and bear it. Or, stated another way, let's say somehow, for some ridiculous reason, because I'm a ridiculous person with ridiculous examples, that we are in a cannibal situation. We are stranded at sea. There is no land for thousands of miles anywhere. There is no civilization, no boats, no planes, nothing for thousands of miles. And it's just two people. And if this person does not eat you, they are going to die. Does that mean they have the right to eat you? And let's assume that eating you would not be painful. And let's assume that eating you would not kill you. Let's assume it wouldn't kill you, it wouldn't hurt, or any of those things. Do they have a right to eat you because they're going to die otherwise? Because I don't think that they do. If someone is about to die, that doesn't give them the right to come up and steal your sandwich. But somehow you think that's how this works with babies, where they can come up and just steal your womb. And even if you want to say, well, unless we're talking about rape, or incest, this person invited this person in. You agreed to have sex, and you agreed to have sex under the possibility that a baby might be a thing that could happen, even if you took contraceptives, which even if we work or operate under those terms, even if I invite someone into my house, I can kick them out whenever I want. And if I invite them into my house and they're starving and I want to kick them out, am I not allowed to kick them out now because they're starving? Do I have to sit there and let the cannibal eat me because I agreed to this at first, but now I realize how terrible of an idea it is, but I have to go through with it because I said yes at first? Because that's what you're making it sound like. At the end of the day, regardless of how you phrase it, you can call it killing babies all you want, but that doesn't change the fact that the babies don't have the right to a woman's body any more than anyone else does. even if their life is on the line.
Okay.
It's all about morality.
Have you read in
It's about your morality, but deciding whether or not it should be legal is not. But it's not clear that that's what he's talking about, so
to what the Eighth Amendment is about?
Yes. Eighth Amendment about equalizing the life of the preborn child with the mother.
Well, that's what it is. That's how it stands.
That's what it. Yeah, that's what it
But
is.
do you know the implications of that?
That it protects human beings in the womb. Yes.
Do you know the implications of that for people who are pregnant, who then are ill in some other way?
Well, I can tell you the implications for as someone who lives in the United States. The implications of doing away with the Eighth Amendment is about 60 million babies deep after 40 years.
okay, but like, here's the other thing. This is incredibly short-sighted, at least as far as he's phrasing it, because you are only seeing this to birth, but you're not thinking ahead of that. So there are a wide variety of reasons as to why a woman might get an abortion, but one of them might be the fact that they simply cannot sustain the child. So to that, you might say, oh, well, they can just put it up for adoption. However, as far as I understand it, adoption is not an easy process. And even if it was, you are encouraging that we create more orphans. And I don't see how that's a good thing. That you would rather have us have more orphans than just not have more orphans. Because I think more orphans are bad. I think more children with no parents are bad. But you don't seem to mind that all too much, given what you seem to think the alternative is. Now, this is not me trying to appeal to emotion or try to make an emotional argument to convince anyone of my side. This is just merely a description of the way that I see things. I encourage anyone, let me check, 0 of you, to actually think about this in greater terms. Anyway, carrying on.
No, my question was, do you know what the implications are with how things are at the moment? A lot of this is focused on abortion, and on having the choice of ending an unwanted pregnancy, but it also is to do with access to healthcare for women and women who have a wanted pregnancy.
What's healthcare? What do you mean?
So
I find it hilarious that we have an American that doesn't know what healthcare is. I'm sorry. I just find it hilarious to see an American who doesn't know what healthcare is. It's glorious. Carry on.
say someone has, now this is something that
Also, I find it interesting that of all the loaded terms used throughout this conversation, that's the one that confuses you. Not God, not morality, not right, not wrong. All of those are clear and objectively understood. But someone says the word healthcare and you're like, whoa, wait, slow down. What do you mean by that?
I hope is correct. I think by saying it may not be completely 100% correct.
Okay.
My understanding is that, and like I'm pro-choice anyway, I think if someone wants to end an unwanted pregnancy for whatever reason, they should be.
You keep using the term unwanted pregnancy.
And you keep using the term baby and life. So,
It seems like that's a euphemism to me.
well, baby and life seems like a euphemism for fetus, but I don't, tell you how to live your life.
What we're really talking about is
They do not want.
right, but what's a pregnancy? What's in there?
It doesn't really matter to me what's in there. What matters is that it's a pregnancy. What we're discussing are two different things. Now, I understand you care about what's in there, and that's the point you're arguing from, but I don't care. So pointing that out to me is a useless observation.
I'm not getting into. We disagree, so I'm not getting into that part.
What I mean is it's an interesting way to frame the argument is to
Pregnant.
right, but getting rid of a pregnancy is getting rid of a what?
But I'm not talking about that element.
You keep trying, you say it's an interesting way to frame the discussion, and then you keep trying to reframe the discussion in a way that gives you more leverage. You keep trying to reframe the discussion to get the person to say, it's killing a baby, even though I don't think that's what it is.
Element of things, and I'm not talking about that element of things. I'm talking
But isn't that the main issue?
You asked me
That's the main issue to you, but that is not the main issue to her, and she is the one you're talking to.
about healthcare for women.
Sure, yeah.
So what I mean by that is, this is my understanding that if, for example, my example may be wrong, but I understand that the principle is still the case. that if a woman had an illness that she needed treatment for that could harm the, let's say it was a wanted pregnancy.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, like, so let's call the thing in the belly a baby.
You just said child.
Yeah. But that's such a...
But you know you're having a hard time.
Yeah, because I know that you'll pick on everything that I'm saying.
No, not pick on it. I want...
That is what you're doing, is picking on it, because you're picking on the semantics. Again, you're trying to frame the discussion. You don't care what point she's actually trying to make, and you're not actually trying to address that. What you're trying to do is wait for her to say baby or child and say, it's killing the baby, isn't it? And you're going to keep bringing the conversation back there rather than addressing the point that she's actually trying to make. And she understands this, which is why she's trying to word her ways in a particular watch her wording in a particular way. But as I am understanding right now, it is very difficult to do that in a live setting, especially with someone who is more interested in semantics than they are with the actual intellectual points behind the words.
I want to encourage you as with love to be consistent. Say child, because that's what it is.
No, you want her to say child because it's advantageous to you in the argument. It's because that's what you think it is. You want her to say child because that's what you think it is, and it helps you get her in a corner where you can point out what you think is wrong. Again, you are not addressing the issue. You are not addressing what she is saying, what she is intending to say, and the actual point she's trying to say. You're like, well, the words you used sound like something else, so I'm going to just go after that. I do not have the luxury of asking my opposition or whomever I'm talking to in a response video. I don't have the luxury to ask them what they mean when they say things, so I operate under certain assumptions for the sake of the conversation. But those are my interpretations and my assumptions. I make no bones that those are actually the points that the person is making. Whereas you don't seem to care about what point she's making. She sounded like she said something that was sort of kind of iffy, so you're just going to jump on it at the first opportunity.
You meant it.
Because I was thinking of a wanted pregnancy, and I was thinking of myself.
So wanting it makes it a child. The mere desire to want.
It would be what I would call it. And again, I can only speak on behalf of myself.
So if a mother kills her 3-year-old,
that's not what I said.
And she said,
again, there's this thing individuals who are pro-life sometimes do, where they conflate this to any kind of murder as if all murder is exactly on the same. As if someone who gets shot by a stray bullet, that is functionally indistinct from someone who is kidnapped, tortured, gutted, mutilated, and then found dead. Because those are definitely the same thing and should be charged in exactly the same way. Again, like I said, this isn't about an honest discussion. This is about getting her to say that it's killing a baby, and once you say that, you have to admit that that's wrong, and you're on my side. This has nothing to do with the actual practical application of what abortion is, step by step, detail by detail. None of that matters. All that matters to you is it's a baby, it's not alive anymore, so it's dead, and you did something, so you killed it, so you killed a baby, and killing babies is wrong. And this is not all of the pro-life side, but it is a significantly consistent portion that I consistently have seen throughout the years, where they frame the discussion around the baby and you can't kill a baby, and they don't pay any attention to anything else. Nothing else is relevant to them. Nothing else matters to them. They're not even willing to consider anything else, like the mother's right to her body. She doesn't have a right to her body. She has to sit there and bear the symptoms and troubles and difficulties of pregnancy, no matter what, because otherwise she'd be killing a baby.
Says, I didn't want it.
That's a false equivalency. That's not what I said. But
really
my point is,
that's what you think she said, but she's trying to clarify her point, and instead of listening to her, you're just like, nah.
Is access to healthcare. You asked about that. If a person who is pregnant.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot about the healthcare thing. See, he even threw me off because he started talking about killing babies instead of the actual subject, which was access to healthcare.
Needs treatment, and that may harm the pregnancy. That may prematurely end the pregnancy. Then
that doesn't.
May not have.
Pregnancy is a state. You can't harm a pregnancy. You can.
What? 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 So pregnancy is a state, but you cannot harm pregnancy. Yeah, you can. If you don't allow pregnancy, the state, to proceed, because pregnancy is more of a process than it is a state, because it doesn't last forever. It is a process. Things happen, it goes through a cycle, and eventually it ends, just like eventually it begins. But that's a side issue, because then I'd have to get into the whole difference between a process and a state. The point is that at the end of the day, the subject matter of healthcare is the main issue of why this particular person is pro-choice. They are pro-choice because it is their understanding that if a woman has a condition that will harm her, and the only treatment available to her would damage or terminate the pregnancy, if you want to be explicit, she is not allowed to have that choice. She must suffer whatever ill condition she has because the treatment would terminate the pregnancy, without regard to the fact that the illness is harming the pregnancy as well. But we don't care about that because no killing babies. Just let them die on their own because you have an illness that you can't actually get rid of.
Prematurely end the pregnancy then. Can prematurely end the pregnancy.
Sure.
So if the treatment that person was to get would prematurely end the pregnancy, then that treatment may not be available to the person pregnant. So
precisely.
That's a lot of what this is about. The focus and the media coverage, and to be honest, a lot of the signs are focusing on access to abortion and having choice. That's one element of it.
To kill your child at will, though, is the.
But another element.
Again, it's like, what did I say? This is a prime example of not applying the principle of charity. This guy refuses adamantly to see any other position other than kill the baby. That's all he hears when she speaks, despite that she's going into detail and she's just talking about healthcare and she's talking about women's rights to access healthcare, even at the detriment of the child. He didn't hear any of that. All he heard was stab the baby. And at the end of the day, that's not a productive conversation. There are individuals that you will not have a productive conversation with because they have entered the conversation with a framework so strong that it's almost unbreakable. And that's what we have here. Everything she says is reframed, turned around, and reworded in such a ways that it is functionally indistinct from kill the baby, because that is his problem and that is how he sees things, and he cannot see things any differently. And at the end of the day, I think it's a shame, because I think she's genuinely trying to understand where he's coming from and genuinely trying to understand how he gets to stab the baby, but he's not interested in understanding her position because he can't see beyond his own. All he sees is stab the baby.
Isn't the real foundational thing here is, because I'll tell you, the signs I saw was keep your laws out of my vagina, stay out of my box, keep your theology out of my biology, my body, my choice. It sounds like you're saying that it's about if a woman's life is in danger, health-wise, in terms of she has cancer or she can't give birth to the child. But that's not what they're debating about.
That's literally what I just said. I said a lot of that focus is on access to abortion.
She was giving that as an example of a larger point, but you're harping on that one example and saying that example isn't like the others. You have to understand, and this is something that I think he would agree with, if I was to address one Christian as all Christians, and then if someone called me out on that, I said, well, yeah, but that's not what the other Christians are doing. If someone presented me, hypothetically, with a legitimate argument for the existence of God, they could explain what a God is, what it means for a God to exist, all of that stuff, and demonstrate all of that. And I tried to refute that by saying, but that's not what most Christians believe. That's not what most Christians say. That's not relevant to the point at hand. It doesn't matter what these other people believe or what they're saying. What matters is the point that she's trying to express. And instead of focusing on that, you're like, but nobody else is saying that, because that's relevant to the discussion that you and her are having.
Which again, I am.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm completely for that.
So if a woman is 20 weeks pregnant, you think she should just be able to kill her child?
Again, you say kill her child. Is like, again, you say kill her child, and to that answer, I would say yes, because the baby does not have a right to her body without her consent and against her will. You have no problem with forcing her to be pregnant. You have no problem with, metaphorically, tying her down against her will and forcing her to come to terms on a pregnancy that she does not want. You are 100% okay with that. You are okay with forcing her to endure the pain and the trials of pregnancy, as well as whatever illnesses she may or may not have, and whatever complications may or may not come up. And you're perfectly fine with that, as you are allowed to be. And I'm okay with stab the baby, if that's what you want to call it. I don't quite frankly care what you call it. You can call it stab the baby, kill the baby, whatever, but the baby does not have the right to the woman's body against her will. Nobody has the right to come into your house against your will. No one has the right to your body or your biology against your will, even if their life is on the line, even if they absolutely need to. And the only way that they can survive is to eat you. They still don't have the right to do it. And you refusing them is not the same thing as you killing them. But that's just my understanding. You can call it whatever you like.
There are also other elements to it as well. So it's not just that.
So when is it okay to murder a child?
I'm not answering these leading questions.
It's like, it is okay to murder a child around the same time that it's okay to tell the public that you beat your wife. If you want to throw loaded questions out there, so can I. I really want to see the rest of that conversation. I really want to see how the rest of that went, but that was interesting. Most of it was just about definitions of word games and semantics, and that was kind of hyper technical and kind of boring, but we got to the juicy stuff of abortion at the end. So if you couldn't glean, as far as I can tell, I'm pro-choice, because no one has a right to your body against your will and without your consent. And there is no acceptable condition at all under which someone has a right to your body and your biology, even if it means that life is on the line. And this is a moral issue that I don't think has any objective truth in it. So you can go back and forth, but this will simply be a matter of what one person finds convincing and what maximizes their values. And at the end of the day, call it what you will, the murder of a child under this specific circumstance maximizes my value of human autonomy. And I am more willing to maximize human autonomy at the risk of a baby's life under this specific circumstance, because I know people try to take that and say, oh, so what you're saying is I can stab my 9-year-old, because prematurely ending a pregnancy and stabbing your 9-year-old in the throat are basically the same thing. Okay. Now, that was fun and nice and all, but there is one more video that I would like to go through by the rather well-known Ravi Zacharias. Just give me a sec to pretend like I'm speeding through this and I know what I'm doing and I am somewhat competent. And we're back. So since we do have quite a bit of time left, I feel like this should take up the vast majority of the time. So let's get into this.
Then how can Christianity make that claim and think that...
I started the video
Another
already.
text question says, if all religions claim to be truth, then how can Christianity make that claim and think that it is correct?
That is the excellent question. And that is a question that does not extend merely to religion or anything of that nature. I believe this can apply to anything. In any given subject that you can think of, everyone thinks they're right. So what makes you think you're right any more than anyone else thinks that they're right?
Appreciate that question, and it's a question that has the assumption that is very correct. oftentimes the Christian takes the.
I'm not necessarily sure that an assumption that is correct is still an assumption, but I guess that would depend on how you arrived at that particular conclusion.
That he or she was a follower of Jesus Christ is the only one who lays claim to exclusivity. That is not true. Gautama Buddha was born a Hindu, and he renounced two of the fundamental doctrines of Hinduism, the authority of the Vedas and the caste system. He could not accept those two, went on his own journey in search of enlightenment, and came, of course, with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the ultimate extinguishing of desire in his nirvanic pursuit. So he turned his belief away from the religion of his birth in order to find a different answer. Islam is also exclusivistic in its claim.
Nothing about what you just showed had anything to do with exclusivity. True, the guy that you're referencing did reject those, but his inability to accept those said nothing about exclusivity. Nothing about those doctrines, as far as I'm aware, pronounces any sort of exclusivity and says that it is the only truth. Nothing about those sort of Hinduistic beliefs. But I could very much be wrong. It's been a while since I've studied on my Hinduism.
In all of its precepts and its 5 pillars and so on. What about these contradictions? The first thing we need to know is there are distinctions, there are fundamental differences. At best, there are superficial similarities. I often hear the question posed.
I think that is quite literally the definition of, and excuse my French, ass backwards. Because at best, there seem to be fundamental similarities and superficial differences. You all, and I say this painting a broad brush on purpose, but as far as the one true worldview religions go, that they all think they're right and everyone else is wrong, you all think you're right, you all think the others are wrong, you all have your doctrines that you believe in, and you all want converts. How am I supposed to distinguish you from a Muslim when both of you think that you're right, both of you think you have divine revelation from this thing called God, and that matters somehow, and both of you think I should read your fancy smancy, panel? I'm sorry, book or scripture or whatever you call it. How are you distinct? Because you say there's a distinction, but I really don't see it. And of course, this is why I set alarms.
Wrongly, they'll say, aren't all religions fundamentally the same and superficially different?
Yes, because they all say that they're right and you should believe them and nobody else. That's the fundamental similarity.
No, they are fundamentally different, and at best they are superficially similar. What are the fundamental claims, for example? In Buddhism, the goal is to extinguish hunger, extinguish desire. I remember talking to the first woman monk who was from Thailand.
I'm not convinced that is the goal. I think that might be the conclusion that you reach, in the same way that Christianity, the conclusion that you reach is Jesus. But the starting point is usually just finding something to believe. Doesn't that sound like a fundamental similarity that all religions have, where they all are trying to find out what the truth is? Or is that a superficial difference, trying to find out what the truth is? That's not fundamental to the core of every religion, trying to find their own truth.
To be ordained into the Buddhist priesthood, but Thai Buddhists do not ordain women, so she went to Sri Lanka to be ordained, and she has a PhD in philosophy from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and Waterloo, I guess, Ontario, McMaster University there. Got her PhD in philosophy, and she gave me the first interview. We chatted for well over an hour, one-on-one, and I sort of angled into some questions because I didn't want to be too discourteous. And one of the things I said,
it's almost like you weren't being genuine, but I'm going to let that go, because angled into some questions could mean you gave loaded questions, but it could also mean that you just sort of tried to lead the discussion in that way because you wanted to ask questions that you just didn't have the courage to ask.
To her is, I hear you're married. And she said, yes. I said, you have children? She said, yes. I said, but you're living in a temple by yourself? She said, yes. I said, do you not see your children? She started crying. She said, I have a car. I said, you have a car? She said, yeah. I said, okay. So she drove herself because she can't allow a man to drive her, she said, so she has to drive herself. And she says, every evening at the end of the day, I try and meet up with one of my children. She said, this is the hardest part of my life. I said, so you are on the journey to extinguishing the desire to be with your children. Is that right? Is that a fair assessment? She kept quiet.
If that was the goal and that was the point, having the car and using the car to see the children would be obviously detrimental to that goal. So I obviously don't think that that was her goal, but okay. And there's nothing wrong with that not being a goal.
Then I said this. I said that Dalai Lama has as his primary pursuit now the freedom of Tibet. She said, that's right. I said, why does he desire that?
No one said that he desired that. You can pursue things without desiring them. Just like lots of people pursue careers and jobs that they don't want and that they hate, but they pursue them anyway. So pursuit and desire are not the same thing, and I think he's conflating them here.
She looked at me and she said, we try not to get into these philosophical questions. Let's just say that he chooses to. You take a look at other world religions and see where these four questions are dealt with. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny.
Why those four questions as opposed to literally any other question? Those sound like questions you made up to distinguish these religions, which is fine, but I don't think that makes a basis to say one is fundamental and the other is superficial based on these arbitrary questions that you made up.
These four questions have to be answered in two ways. Follow me, please.
Why do they have to be answered in only these two ways? It's almost like you're setting up a false dichotomy from the start, because you've entered the conversation with the idea that it must be one of these two things and it can't be anything else. And that doesn't seem like an open-minded way to approach any investigation if your starting point is it has to be this way or it has to be that way.
Every particular answer has to correspond to truth, either through empirical form of measurement or through the logical reasoning process.
As if the logical reasoning process isn't necessarily the same, but okay.
And when those four answers are put together, they must cohere and not be incoherent. So the two tests.
Okay, could you give an example? Because this is all very pie in the sky theoretical.
Correspondence and coherence. I guarantee.
Why only those two things, though? You say correspondence and coherence, but I don't see a distinction between corresponds with the truth and is the truth.
Only in the Judeo-Christian worldview will you find these four questions answered with corresponding truthfulness and with the coherence of a worldview.
Even if you find that to be the case, that doesn't necessitate it's true, because the only thing that should matter is the truthfulness, right? What does the coherence have to do with it? The coherence should come first, by the way, because you can't assess the truth of something if it's incoherent, and then you should be able to find the truth. But nothing else should matter, particularly not those four questions that you brought up. And essentially, when you say correspondence and coherence, what you mean to say is validity and soundness. It has to have an internal structure that makes sense, as in all of the premises necessitate the conclusion, and all of the premises are true, which essentially seems to be what he said. He just rephrased it differently, and I don't know why, but okay.
Let me take just one example, and I don't say this to slight, but this is a fact, and we have to deal with it. I've been invited in many, many Islamic countries, and I have open forums there, and I'm going to go to one of the toughest Islamic countries for the next few weeks. They've hosted me in many parts there, and we've had dialogues. I want to give to you two things. In the Quran, It is the only historically claimed document that denies that Jesus Christ was actually crucified or died on the cross. Denies that.
Okay.
Greek historians say he died on the cross. Roman historians say that. Pagan historians say that. Jewish historians say that. And Christian historians say that.
Do secular historians say that? And why does it matter who says it? Doesn't it matter more that it's true more than who says it? I thought what you were complaining about before was correspondence and coherence. As far as I can tell, Jesus Christ was crucified is coherent enough, but you don't demonstrate correspondence to truth by saying these people said it, these people said it, these people said it, this person didn't say it. That is not relevant to the truth of the matter. So I don't know why you're bringing it up. Ex-historian said so. Because I don't care what the historian said, I care why they said it. That is more important.
Islamic, the Quran is the only one that says it appeared to him that he died, but he didn't actually die on the cross. So historically, it is making an affirmation that is really historically untrue.
No, you have not affirmed the truth or lack thereof. You said it said something that other things don't say. The Quran says something that all these other religions, all these other historians don't say. The Greek historians say so. The Christian historians say so. These historians say so. That historian say so. Therefore, the Quran is wrong. That's as far as your reasoning has got you, because you most certainly have not demonstrated that Jesus Christ was crucified. You just said a bunch of people say so. I'm sorry, a bunch of historians say so. And if a historian says so, or if a bunch of them say so, it obviously must be true, right?
I got into a discussion with Sheikh Hussein of the leading Shiite cleric in Damascus, Syria, a real gentleman. For over 3 hours, we talked with an interpreter between us and an audience listening in. I was allowed to ask him one question about his faith, and he was allowed to ask me one question about mine. There was nothing, no rancor, no adversarial stance, just a perspective and counter-perspective and back and forth. It's the best way to do it, really. At the end of it, Sheikh Hussein looked at me, was very respectful through the whole time, always referred to me as Professor Zacharias, Professor Zacharias. And then at the end, he looked at me, leaned over, and he said, you know, Professor, I think the time has come for us in the Islamic world to stop asking if Jesus Christ died and to start asking why.
Before you get to that, why? What made him come to that conclusion or perspective? I find it interesting that you just sort of say this conversation happened without saying what the details were that got him to this point. Just at the end of the conversation, he started to agree with you. Stop clapping. He has not said anything worth clapping or praise. All he said was, I had a conversation with a dude, and at the end of the conversation, he started to agree with me. Then everyone clapped.
Said to him, may I quote you on that, sir? He said, yes, you may. I'm hopefully going to go there before long, and I hope we can meet up again.
But you still haven't addressed the question of why. All of this is very fascinating and all that, but why did he come to that conclusion? Why did he change his mind? What did you say to him that changed his mind? What is your evidence that Jesus was crucified on the cross? Where are your citations? Where's your evidence? Where's anything? You've given us nothing other than the claim, and a bunch of historians said so. You didn't even go into detail about why those historians said so. They're historians, and most of them say so. So they got to be right. When people investigate scientific claims, it's not good enough to say most scientists think such and such and so, therefore it's true. They usually cite the studies, they cite the tests, they cite the experiments, they cite the evidence as to why those scientists come to those conclusions. People usually in debates don't merely invoke the consensus of science. They invoke the consensus of science with reasons and evidence. But you haven't done that. You just invoked the consensus of historians and said, well, if they said it, it must be true. It's not like historians have ever been wrong about anything. Also, you didn't even say why the historians thought that, just that they did. You couldn't even be bothered to tell us why the Greek historians think that, why the Christian historians think that, even though they're Christian historians. So, of course, they would think that.
Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. The Judeo-Christian worldview is not the only one that claims exclusivity, but is the only one that takes those four questions with corresponding answers that are truthful and coherent answers that stand the test of time.
Whether or not they're coherent isn't really all that relevant in regards to these four questions, because it should just be a matter of whether or not the religion's true, not whether or not it has a coherent answer to morality. You can have a coherent answer to morality. That doesn't mean that your entire belief system is true. I don't see no valid reason why answering those four questions perfectly makes your religion better than all the others.
And the ultimate answer of the resurrection from the dead that gives you hope and meaning.
Even if it gives you hope and meaning, the primary concern is truth without regard to those things, because if you regard those things, they will influence your investigation. And the only thing that should influence your investigation is whether or not it's true, as to not defer you from that goal.
I see we have one more question left, and that's the sign here. I'll be happy to take that.
To that very, very quickly, because the question comes also in this fashion. Have you studied all the religions in the world in order for you to know that your religion is right? Could it not be possible that you have missed something? Now, that sounds like a very daunting question, but it's really not that difficult to deal with, because all the worldviews in existence, all the worldviews that exist can actually be grouped at the very basic level. You could spend an eternity maybe studying just one of these religions. But all the worldviews in existence can be grouped under only three categories, all the worldviews.
So what you're saying is they're fundamentally similar, right? Yes? No?
The first category is the view that only the universe exists. The other category is only God exists. Of course, you find naturalism and atheism on the left side. Only the universe exists. But when some Eastern religions will tell you only God exists, and that's cashed out in different ways. I'm just using the word God just to make it easy for us to grasp this concept. Then in the middle, you have the view that both God and the universe exist.
I would like to point out that this does not encompass everything that a person is capable of believing or accepting. So, if I am a skeptic skeleton and I don't know, where do I fit in this category? Because I don't seem to clearly fit into any of those. Yes, I believe the universe exists insofar as I exist because I'm in it, as far as I can tell. Yet somehow, go away, anti-sleeper, somehow it is the case that because I believe that the universe exists, I believe that only the universe exists. What if I just don't know if anything other than the universe exists? That's not the same thing as saying only the universe exists. And it's not the same thing as saying things besides the universe exist. It's somewhere in the middle. So I say that to say a skeptical position does not fit with any three of these as far as I can tell, because a skeptical position would not affirm the exclusivity of any of these. They might say God exists, but I don't know what else exists. They might say God and the universe exists, but I don't know what else exists. They might say the universe exists, but I don't know what else exists, which are fundamentally different than only these things exist.
Both God and the universe exist, and under that you have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So it's not difficult to apply the test that Rabbi was talking about to these systems as a whole without having to study each particular one. You just need to know.
So what you're saying is you have come up with a system to group religions that you have never encountered with together, and you have determined that these things that you've never come into contact with are wrong on the basis that you've lumped them together with other things that you know to be false. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like you have determined that some religions are wrong because they're kind of like other religions that you think you've determined to be wrong. but you still haven't addressed the actual issue, and you still haven't demonstrated that these other things are wrong.
What the basic ideas, what the basic thoughts are for these views, then you can critique all of them without having to be an expert in every worldview.
The question is not that you have, the point being made is not that you have to be an expert in everything before you can decide on anything. The question is, have you sufficiently done the research into other religions? If the only religion you've studied is the one you believe in, how did you verify the falsehood of any of the other religions? And it sounds like instead of actually falsifying other religions, you just sort of come up with a method that allows you to falsify other religions without actually investigating them thoroughly. That's what it sounds like to me. This doesn't sound like a method to be skeptical without being skeptical to an obtuse degree. It sounds like just denying other religions because you came up with a criteria to deny them on, not because you actually have a legitimate basis to deny them on, but you just sort of made up a basis to deny them on, a basis that you still haven't fully shared with us, but okay.
That's out there. So it's important for us to know that this is not so difficult to do. We are not making it up in trying to come up with an answer to this kind of a question.
You can say you're not trying to make it up, but so far you haven't appealed to anything other than yourself. The entirety of this video has just been an appeal to you and questions that you've made up and processes that you've thought of. What about pretty much anything you've said has not been made up in terms of the points that you're making?
This gentleman, very humble guy, and we didn't want to give another university too much of advertising here lest we be thrown out, but he is just finishing up his PhD work at the University of Georgia, and I'm going to carry the work out, guys.
All right, we do have time for one more question.
Well, that was certainly a thing. And we have a little bit of time left. And since no one's in the chat for the most part, I'm not going to make this any more elongated than it has to be. But I am very, very interested by those 4 questions from Professor Ravi Zacharias. And I think that will be next week's stream. We'll go over his 4 reasons or his 4 questions and see how Christianity answers all of them. I think that will be fun. So, since no one's in the chat and there's no one to really engage with and acknowledge besides the deconverted man berating me for missing the chat about 2 hours ago, I think I will take my leave and I will see you guys next week. To anyone watching this, stay skeptical and always don't believe me. Do your own research. Look into the full context of these videos. Come to your own conclusions. Don't just believe the things that I put out. Until then, I'll see you next time.